Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński and you're watching Break the Fake. They make them, we break them, and tell you everything you need to know. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov has once again decided to talk about international security. And, as is often the case, he went off on a tangent, but with swelling confidence. This time, Crimea, Greenland, the United States, the European Union, Britain, and just in case, Moldova were all included. Once again, the geographical map of the world, as brought to us by the imagination of Russian diplomacy, was turned into something of a collage, with a sprinkle of abstract art thrown in for good measure. Now, according to Lavrov's logic, Crimea is to Russia as Greenland is to the US. That is, in terms of strategic importance, security, geopolitics, and so on. The difference, however, is in the details. Greenland was not captured by tanks, it was not liberated by missile strikes, and Denmark did not receive ultimatums from the Kremlin. But who in the Russian Foreign Ministry pays attention to such details when given the opportunity to shine with a brilliant metaphor?
Мы не имеем никакого отношения к планам захватить Гренландию. Я не сомневаюсь нисколько, что в Вашингтоне прекрасно знают об отсутствии таких планов и у России, и у Китайской Народной Республики. У нас многие вообще не знали, что это такое среди наших граждан, пока вдруг Гренландия не заняла первые полосы. Ну, это решайте внутри Североатлантического альянса, еще раз говорю. Мы посмотрим, как будет решен этот вопрос.
The statement that the US knows perfectly well that Russia and China have no plans to seize Greenland sounded particularly naive. Here, I would like to clarify, even if they did, who would be the first to find out? But wait, there is more. According to Lavrov, Russia has no connection to Greenland, but is watching it closely. The wording here is familiar. This is how Moscow-spun stories usually begin, which are then justified by protecting Russian-speaking penguins or historical justice for rare earth minerals. At the same time, Lavrov assured that the Russian Federation cannot allow the West to rearm Ukraine because it allegedly plans to attack Russia. In other words, a country that has been defending itself against a full-scale invasion for 4 years is, according to the Kremlin logic, still preparing for aggression. I guess Russia assumes this is not the kind of question you ask in polite society. Never ask a woman her age, never ask someone their political or religious beliefs, and now, never ask Moscow who invaded whom in 2014 and 2022.
Хотя мы видим, как буквально истерично Европа и Зеленский со своей командой пытаются сбить Соединенные Штаты с этой позиции и пытаются опять навязать свои концепции, включая прежде всего 60-дневное, а то и вечное перемирие. Понятно, что украинская сторона находится в очень плохой ситуации на линии фронта, да и не на линии фронта, в политике, в политической жизни в Киеве. Коррупционные скандалы затмили многие другие процессы. Но позволить в очередной раз перевооружить киевский режим и дать ему возможность перевести дух и опять наброситься на Российскую Федерацию в качестве инструмента обезумевших западноевропейцев.
The result is a classic set of Russian diplomatic tactics, justification of aggression, manipulation of the concept of security, disregard for international law, and casual humiliation of its own citizens who, according to the minister, are taught about the country's new expanding geography on television. So as you can see, the comparison of Crimea to Greenland is far from accidental here. It is an attempt to normalize Russia's occupation of Ukraine, to present it as normal geopolitical practice, in fact. Because let's face it, whatever you think of Trump and his Greenland game, any comparison made by Russia falls flat for one simple reason: the context. When would this comparison be even slightly valid? Perhaps had Russia stopped at Crimea only with a mostly non-violent land grab, without the Donbass war of 2014, not to mention the invasion of 2022 and the atrocities that followed and which are still happening. Or, looking at it from the flip side, imagine Trump taking Greenland by force, then occupying parts of Denmark and Sweden, while also bombing the power grid in France and Belgium to the point of plunging Paris into constant blackouts. Nonsense, I know, but this is the only way we could compare Crimea to Greenland without comparing apples to oranges, no pun intended. After 2022, Mariupol became a symbol of suffering, destruction and violence. But now that the war is no longer so hot in the literal sense, one might think the problem has disappeared. Well, I hate to break it to you, but it has not. It has simply changed shape. You see, under Russian occupation, the survivors of the siege often found that the only protected rights they have are their words, something that can be erased as easily as penciled entries in a workbook. Take the story of a woman who worked her entire life at Azovstal, a company that was not just a factory, but the heart of the city of Mariupol. And now, following reassignment and re-registration, she discovered that her work experience has disappeared, as if it had never been there. This is not a story about bureaucracy. It is a story about how state mechanisms that are supposed to protect people become a tool for eradicating their very existence.
У вас что-нибудь изменилось с пособием, с пенсией?
Нет.
Так и ничего не изменилось.
И нигде не могу ничего добиться.
А в чем проблема?
Ну, вот нету свидетелей трудовую восстановить. Моих нету живых.
И архива, да, никого?
И что, у них в компьютере ничего нет? Есть Азовсталь, но наша организация, она... Ну, как... Орс, да, питание.
Угу.
И у нас каждых 2 года новый хозяин был.
Это уже потом.
И все. Мы и к Москве были, и к Донецку, и здесь, и Днепропетровск. Короче, организация вот это со всего мира. Нигде ничего не могу.
Правильно я понимаю, что у вас был стаж, была хорошая пенсия, а теперь ни пенсии, ни
Ничего,
стажа,
вообще.
ничего, и как будто вы по возрасту даже не подходите еще. Да, представляете, вот такая тяжелая ситуация. И вы живете только на одну пенсию, да, вашего мужа?
The scheme described by the woman is very simple. The enterprise passes from hand to hand, and with each change of ownership and political control, the archives, documents and records simply vanish. Which is a real problem, because employment records, pensions and work experience are not just pieces of paper. They are proof that a person exists in a system, that they work, pay their taxes and are entitled to social support. When this disappears, the person becomes invisible. They exist, but not on paper. After Russian liberation supposedly arrived to Mariupol, many people found themselves in a situation where their contributions, years of employment and work experience were lost. This woman's story is far from being an isolated case. It is a systemic problem affecting thousands of people in the occupied territories. When this state not only destroys cities but also erases documents, it is not just destroying infrastructure, it is destroying the accumulated proof of people's lives. And the worst thing is that this is happening not in a state of war, but in a state of so-called peace that is being imposed by force, obviously. Seems like we have a pattern here. The Russian army is a mixture of ruthlessness and absurdity, and so is Russian bureaucracy, a mixture of ruthlessness and absurdity. All this is proof that living under Russian rule is never the real-life utopia Moscow promises, but a surreal experience that's part horror and part dark comedy, both with an aggregate score of about 8% on Rotten Tomatoes. A low-budget box office flop that makes Madame Web look like Citizen Kane. Except, unfortunately, you can't just grab your popcorn and leave the theater. And with this, We conclude this edition of Break the Fake. Stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.